All right. Well, hello, everybody. Having some issues here with a couple different technical things, but we're going to go ahead and get started. It's not going to show up on LinkedIn today, unfortunately, due to a time change thing that makes it not work for LinkedIn. But we're going to nature journal some bugs, and I'm really excited to show you some of the cool bugs that I've been seeing in Galapagos, including this butterfly right here. Some of these could be endemic species, some of them could be invasive species, some of them could be native species, and each one of those does have slightly different connotation and meaning here in Galapagos. Very important stuff. So bear with me also with some of the technical stuff that I'm getting set up here. I'm not sure, Ivea. I have not iNaturalisted this one yet, and I will talk about iNaturalist a little bit later in this episode. Thanks for bringing that topic up. Good to see you, Ivea, and Hashi is here, and it looked like there were a bunch of people here early because there were some issues with the scheduling. Get your chocolate ready, get your nature journal ready. I'm going to talk about some things for nature journaling bugs in the field, some of my favorite tools. I do have links for these in the video description. That's one way to help the channel out. And these Papilio Pentax binoculars. I'm not sponsored by any of these companies, but I have been going back to doing the Amazon affiliate links. Even though it's not my favorite company in the world, I know a lot of people do use it for convenience, and for some people, it's one of the main ways that they get stuff. So I am continuing to use it because it is one of the few ways that I'm actually able to make some money for the channel. So if you haven't tried any of these yet, consider looking at them through the links that I provided in the description, and I'll just post them right here as well. And let's dive into this. So this is actually going to be a nature journaling session. So you'll get a look at my page, but we're actually going to be mostly looking at these images here. So I'm going to zoom in there. This is a photo I just took this morning on Santa Cruz Island, which is basically the main island I'm going to be on. I might go to San Cristobal a little bit, and I might be, yes, it is 7 p.m. where I am, Ivea. So I will briefly go into the definitions. So for Galapagos, and I think this is how it's usually used, endemic is something that can only be found there. It's like exclusive. So for example, there is an endemic bumblebee that we're going to look at. Actually, it's more like a carpenter bee, I guess. There's an endemic bee here. So that means it is only found here. There are species that are native to the archipelago, but they're not exclusive. So they could be, they've been here for a very, very long time. That's the tricky part with all these definitions. But they could also be on the mainland too. So for example, there's yellow warblers here. And this one is a good example to show that nothing in nature is perfect, but the yellow warblers here are native but not endemic, and then invasive is a controversial term, but here it's usually applied to anything that was not anything that was brought here by humans recently. So for example, they have a type of blackberry, and I know that these aren't all bugs. Okay, so let's get into the bugs though. So the first thing that I want to do as a warm-up is blind contour. So get your drawing stuff ready, and we're gonna do a blind contour with this first butterfly. So if you haven't seen blind contour before, the idea is that you look at your subject matter and you don't look at your drawing, and that often forces you to guess about where you are on the page. So as you can see here, mine came out pretty wonky, but that's normal because I'm not actually looking at my drawing while I'm doing it. But this is a great warm-up. It teaches you how to draw in a way that doesn't require you picking your pen or pencil up from the paper. And it also just forces you to be a little bit more loose. So see, you can see there I did a second one. So go ahead and do some. Oh, Karen is here too. Great question. I have a huge case on my phone and it works fine. There's probably some cases it won't work with, but you can see here it opens up like that's, I would say, at least an inch. It opens up about an inch. Um, and I think it would work with a lot of cases. The cool thing is it's also only like $34. So for the benefit you get, this current photo we're looking at wasn't taken with this, but you'll see in a second that it makes a huge difference because most of the phones aren't good at focusing on small things. Even if the lens might be capable of it, it's the focus part, and you might have to put your hand behind the bug to take a photo, and that usually ruins things. All right, so we're gonna move on to the next thing, and I'll make this slide a little bit bigger. So hopefully you did a quick blind contour there. You could have even done a blind contour of the plant. And you can do a blind contour here, but one other important thing that I'm going to talk about is the importance of looking at bugs from multiple perspectives. For example, like butterflies and things like that, all of this, almost all the scientific illustrations are just going to show them in like this position, right? And that position is useful in some ways, but it's also not very natural or realistic. So trying to get in those different perspectives, because this right here is not a very natural position for that type of bug. So getting in multiple perspectives is very important. And as you can see on this moth, there are colors on the wing that you can only see from certain perspectives. But then in the photo on the right, you can see what the legs are like, and you can also see the mouth parts. Can anyone see the mouth parts on that one? So I'm just going to go ahead and do another blind contour. I might make it more of like a modified contour at this point, which means you look at the drawing a couple of times. It helps you get more accurate. The angle on these hawk moth wings can be really tricky, but also really characteristic of this species, this taxa, I should say, and this taxon, I should say. So if you get that angle right, and I didn't quite get it right there, it's really characteristic of this taxon. Yeah, you can see the proboscis curled up if you look closely on the right. And this photo was taken with this Zenvo lens. And you can see that one thing about it is you need to be really close to take the picture. So in this case, the moth was dead because you probably need to be about maybe 3 inches maximum away from the lens to make this thing work. And it's really complementary with nature journaling. I know multiple nature journalers who this is part of their everyday kit. When they go nature journaling, they always have this with them. It was originally recommended to me by Akshay, I think. Thanks, Akshay. And I pretty much don't go anywhere without these two tools when I'm nature journaling bugs or nature journaling anything for that matter. These are super good for flowers also. Okay, so multiple perspectives is important. Now let's do one more blind contour here. I'm going to make this a little bit bigger. So go ahead and do a blind contour, or if you're beyond blind contour, just practice a quick sketch. Mantids and some other bugs are going to be quick moving, so you might have to draw them quickly. They're not going to just sit there like a specimen in an entomological collection. So you should be comfortable or mildly uncomfortable drawing moving bugs. And sometimes for flying ones, for example, you might not see the wings at all. Like my bumblebee drawings in flight, sometimes they look like that. And if that's all you see and you see like one band of black like that, that's totally a fine sketch. So let me just show you what I'm talking about here in case you didn't see that. So Drawing moving bugs is important if you're nature journaling them in the field. So here you can see that my bug that might be all that I see from a flying solitary bee, or not necessarily solitary, but a large bee, like a bumblebee or a carpenter bee. And it's totally fine to draw it just like that. Or sometimes you might just kind of get something like that, and then the bug is gone. That's fine. So right now with this mantis, we're just practicing getting some of those shapes. And this is where you can see that blind contour drawing prepares you, because um, even if you're looking at your drawing, knowing how to draw something where your pen doesn't leave the page is actually really useful. And I might have mentioned this before, but that type of drawing where your drawing tool doesn't leave the page, you can see this in some great artists such as Picasso, for example, where some aspects of that cross over into their regular drawings. I don't know if he did blind contour drawings or not, but you can definitely see drawings that he did where there's a continuous line. He even has a famous photo, a long exposure photo, where he draws like a minotaur with the glowing ember of a cigar and a long exposure photograph. All right, so this is a mantis. I haven't gotten this confirmed on iNaturalist yet, but I do think there is an endemic Galapagos praying mantis, which is really cool. All right, let's go to the next slide. Okay, so here's another thing that I want to talk about is that we have a tendency to see organisms in isolation and draw them and nature journal them in isolation, and that includes bugs. However, bugs and all other organisms are in relationships. They are defined by their relationships and their context. So in this case, you can see there's a relationship going on here. So let's just take a second to maybe try drawing a bug now that's not just floating in the middle of a white page by itself. It's in relationship with other organisms. It might be cultural as well. It's really easy to bash on Western culture and say Western culture kind of, uh, you know, separates individuals from the background. And it's probably true. There's some, linguistic studies and different sociological studies on like Japanese students versus American students, as in students from the USA, and how they relate things or how they explain things that they're seeing. Um, whether they explain it in terms of like context and environment and relationships or individuals. And it does appear from the sociological research that certain cultures see things as about individuals more. But I think it also might be a human thing to some degree. So far, we've just drawn a bunch of individual bugs floating around by themselves. So uh, let's try now to at least just show this one. And we're only doing sketching, but if you want to be writing things or using numbers, that's fine too. Some of this is just practice or cross training. In a lot of ways, I wouldn't really call what we're doing right now actual nature journaling. It's more like training for nature journaling, so that when you're out in a situation with these bugs that you're seeing, you can nature journal them. That's why it's good. One thing I like to do, and I'll just show a little bit more clearly here. One thing I like to do is on my page, if I'm doing something online or from references, I'll either show like a camera, or in this case, it looks like a laptop, maybe a YouTube symbol, something like that, so that I know this is like metadata. I know where this is coming from. I know this wasn't live with bugs that I was seeing in real life. It's also really easy to make a symbol that looks like a camera, or you could just write from photos. You could write from photos that Marley took or from photos I got online. Any of that type of information is really important, because later you might look back on this and be like, wow, where did I see those bugs? Sorry if you can hear the dogs barking in the background. There's been a lot of dog drama here lately. It's been kind of stressful, so I'm going to eat a little bit of chocolate. Hmm. Great question, Ivea. Love that question. You all know that uh, I'm really into Hymenoptera. I like Lepidoptera too, but not really the butterflies. I mean, butterflies are cool, obviously, but I like moths better usually. But definitely first love would be the Hymenoptera. In this case, and we're going to talk about bug orders in a minute. Okay, so hopefully you got that. The next thing to do is going to be mix things up a little bit using some words. So we're going to use I notice, I wonder, it reminds me of, obviously. And you could do that with this same bug, but just to keep things flowing, I think we're going to see what our next slide is here. Oh, measurements. Okay, I'll talk about measurements really quickly. Um, Measuring things is really useful. All of the photos we've looked at so far didn't have a measurement reference. And this thing in this photo, if we didn't have the measurement reference, you might think it's really big. And this species actually does get really big. I'm pretty sure this is the endemic centipede in Galapagos. It's in the Scolopendra genus. And this one, though, is very long relative to its width, but it's not that big overall. That's my goniometer there. You can see with the centimeter side. So this thing was like, I think it was less than 12 centimeters long. It might even be less than 10 centimeters long, but really thin, like maybe 2 millimeters wide, which is pretty crazy. And we're not going to draw this one, but I just wanted to mention that measurement is important. Measuring weight of a bug would be really cool too, but I think that is hard. So that's a Scolopendra. It's a centipede. Oh, James likes the bees. Definitely good choice. There are some amazing bees. Oh, Susan is here. Hi, Susan. Okay, let's check the next slide. Okay, so we're actually going to do I notice, I wonder, it reminds me of on this one because this is the perfect place to use it. So hopefully you all know about I notice, I wonder, it reminds me of by now. And if you're new, you're about to find out. And this is the most powerful learning and teaching tool that I know of. In Weirmo. If I could only share one thing or only use one tool or only remember one thing, it would be this. So it's I notice, I wonder, it reminds me of. And these are prompts for thinking, they're prompts for conversation, and they can even be prompts for feedback. Let me show you a little bit bigger. This is the abbreviation that I'm using right here. And what we're going to do is we're going to start with I notice. And that's really helpful in a situation like this where you actually can't really tell what's going on. And maybe you're not really sure what things are. You might accidentally misinterpret things, such as the photo on the right. It would be really easy to say, I notice like multiple bugs, or I notice bugs fighting, or I notice bugs mating. Those aren't observations, those are all interpretations. So a direct observation is something that you can see, observe directly with your senses. So in this case, we're trying to just keep it really basic to shape. So I'll give you a couple examples, and you can do this written down, but you can also do it out loud. In fact, it's really good to do this out loud with kids or people who don't even read or write yet. So it's a great way to introduce nature journaling type thinking without having to go through all the drawing. And I use it for stealth teaching all the time. It's a great technique for stealth teaching nature journaling. So I'm going to say, for example, I notice white things. I'm going to use incomplete sentences. Feel free to write in the comments some of the things that you notice, direct observations. I post these on my Instagram a lot, and what I've noticed is that when I do these, I notice things on Instagram, people are often unsure what the difference is between an interpretation and a direct observation, and most of what people offer on Instagram when I post these questions is interpretations. So for example, if I said, I notice a bug on a flower, or I notice an insect on a flower, I'm assuming it's an insect and I'm assuming it's a flower. Those aren't observations. So instead, I notice white things. I notice multiple shapes. Let's see what some things are that people at home who are watching this, what are some things that you notice? Um, I'm going to say long, skinny, dark shapes. And what you realize is this is a much more objective way to start, which is very helpful because once our brain thinks it knows something, it's hard for us to notice information that goes against that. So once I say, I notice a beetle, my brain is going to make it hard for me to notice things that disprove it's a beetle. So if that's a little bit confusing and abstract, go ahead and eat a little bit more chocolate, scientifically proven to help brain function. I probably have confirmation bias around that. So confirmation bias is the effect whereby your brain blocks out the information that goes against your interpretation or your theory. Okay, maybe the comments are not going in, or maybe the internet's too slow or something. I notice, and we're going to switch into the next one here in a second, is a question. I'm going to just say, I notice green. Yes, confirmation bias is an awesome concept. And it looks like a bunch of people left alive because this concept is maybe a little bit too abstract, but it doesn't have to be, and we'll get into questions here in a second. All right. Also, feel free to mix up I notice, I wonder, it reminds me of. You don't have to always do it in order. Sometimes it makes sense not to do it in order. So if you're nature journaling bugs and you don't know what to do, I notice, I wonder, it reminds me of is one of the best things you can do for how to nature journal bugs. And it will give you some structure, and you could do it without even writing anything down. So like if you're with a little kid, for example, and you're looking at a bug with a little kid, instead of just trying to pull out scientific names from your butt, what you could do is you could do, I notice, I wonder, it reminds me of with them. And that would be a much more enriching engagement with that kid than just trying to make up some scientific names or tell the kid like, that's an arachnid, not an insect, or what's a bug and what's an insect. All of that is sort of meaningless. Direct observation is much more important. Okay, so we're going to do some I notice, I wonder, it reminds me of on the next bug too. So next thing it would be, what are some questions I could ask? I could just write, what is that? How many are there? If you look at the photo on the right, how many are there? It would be really easy to assume how many are there, but I think it's a trick question in this case. Or the photo on the left, how many are there? Like, what is actually going on there? You can also, if you have an interpretation, you can shift it into a question instead. So like, if you think this is a beetle, instead of saying it's a beetle, or like telling that imaginary kid that I mentioned before, saying it's a beetle, instead you could say, I wonder if it's a beetle, or is it a beetle? That's a huge difference between saying that and saying it's a beetle. And what most people do is they just go around saying what they think things are. Is it a beetle? Is it a moth? What is it doing? Is it eating the flower? Those are all things you could ask. And then finally, it reminds me of a hydra. If you think you know the answer, you can phrase it here in it reminds me of, like, it reminds me of a moth, which is the identification I'm leaning towards. And by doing that in the in a Weirmo format, it just helps our learning so much more. And if you're nature journaling bugs, I'm telling you, like doing some drawing and doing this is going to help you out. All right, let's go to the next. Okay, here's another one. So we could do Inawirmo again, and we could also combine it with drawing. So I'll show you how to do this in a more organic way. So basically, for example, if I look at this, I kind of just do a modified blind contour drawing of it, not trying to be too detailed or anything. This approach will also help you if you think you can't draw, because it takes the pressure off of the pretty picture. And if you take the pressure off of the pretty picture, you'll be surprised that sometimes you actually get more pretty pictures when you're not so worried about making a pretty picture. You'll also have more fun, learn more, and be less likely to quit. So just keeping it really loose. In a minute, we'll talk about how to identify a couple of the different insect orders. So one thing I'm going to add now to like a sort of modified blind contour drawing or a loose sketch is arrows. Super useful. And I want to zoom in on this part here because it looks like there's this weird thing sticking off of the bug there. And I'm just going to write, what is that? And then another way that you can use arrows, for example, you could point at the eye, and if you don't have color, you could say green. That would be an observation. So here's an I notice, here's an I wonder, and I'm going to say down here, it reminds me of a fruit fly. So you can just see how organically we did a sketch and we did I notice, I wonder, it reminds me of. So right here, you can see how organically we've got the sketch, we've got an observation, I notice, I wonder, and it reminds me of. And this is probably how it will go when you're in the field. And this example Ivea is giving, or this question Ivea is giving, is a perfect example. And this does happen a lot. Like when I lead groups, I notice that people often during the I notice part will say something that it reminds them of. And so I think if you're doing organic in Awirmo, that's totally natural and that's to be expected. If you're trying to go like in a precise order and actually like make people understand the difference between I notice and it reminds me of, then you might want to kind of be like, okay, that's not exactly something that you're observing. It's still, you're connecting it to previous information. It's technically, it reminds me of. It's not really an I notice, if that makes sense. If you're being like really particular, and that's up to you as a facilitator or educator to decide, or just a self-aware nature journaler for yourself to decide when you're just going to kind of go organically or when you're going to try to be a stickler about like what all the separate things actually mean. Okay, in the comments, see if you can type in any cool questions or observations about this organism. And I'm just going to go ahead and say, I'm pretty sure it is some type of fruit fly. What do you notice? Is there anything in there that you notice or any questions that you have? I wonder what these are used for, if anything. Neat colors. Yeah, that sounds like something a kid would say. Yeah. This would be a good one to zoom in on even more. And this, oh, great question. Up and Adam is here. Great question. And see, this is really, I think this is really important because so you can kind of tell from this question that Adam is a nature know-it-all, like many of us, or at least has some knowledge of nature and sort of some of these concepts, such as mimicry. So the really great thing is he is phrasing this as a question because a lot of times us, nature knowledgeable people, when we're with like muggles in nature, will often be like, oh yeah, that's things mimicking that, or we'll often kind of, our brain wants to jump to these conclusions and interpretations, and we're usually right. We're often right with these, recognizing these patterns, but sometimes we're not. And so I think it's really important. It can be really important to be able to say it as a question. So I'm going to write that one down. I think it's really cool. Is it mimicking something? And I think that if, for example, you're like a nature guide or an educator and you're with a group of kids and you see something that looks like it's mimicry in nature and you just say that is mimicking a blah blah blah, it's not a very useful thing to say. Actually, it's not useful for you, and it might not be really useful for the kids. I think it's much more useful and fun to ask it as a question. Is it mimicking something? It also opens up the space for other people to make observations or questions. And it also makes it harder for you to be wrong. Also, people assume once they call something like mimicry, like for example, I saw this ant in the Amazon. Actually, it was a spider. It's a spider that imitates ants. And the first time I saw it, I was with a group of nature nerds, and they're like, look, it's a spider that imitates ants. And it was as if like that, by explaining that, it suddenly is like, oh, okay, that's cool. And like, you just kind of assume like what that actually means, and you stop asking questions. But I started asking the questions like, why does it visually mimic ants? Like, for example, don't ants like not really use vision very much, or like what is the actual benefit of mimicking an ant? So the thinking in questions is much more sophisticated than thinking in conjectures and assumptions and overconfidence. Thanks for that great one. This is also a really cool one. Really great question, James. This is also a really great direct observation. So there is some interpretation involved here, right? But at the same time, it's like noticing that there are, and there's even a more basic way of making this observation. Like I noticed that there's certain parts that are like constricted, um, and it looks like there's multiple sections. Um, Here's an example of how Ivea used some sort of mitigating language. So, for example, she says eyes. So instead of just assuming they're eyes, she uses a question mark. And see, this might feel like being like a stickler in some cases, like, oh, well, obviously they're eyes. But we're talking about nature. Nature has the weirdest, most confusing things ever. So I think it's really good to practice not assuming anything. And this is really cool too. Ivea maybe already knows what these organs are, but on flies, they actually do have things that supposedly function like gyroscopes, and that is one of the things that defines the order of the Diptera, which is the fly order. And so now jumping from the sort of asking questions and staying open and everything like that to actually just kind of blurting out a bunch of nature knowledge or whatever, which can just be wrong as well. But I can't remember the name of these, but the Diptera order, the flies, most insects, I think all insects supposedly have two sets of wings. They have fore wings and rear wings. And in Diptera, they only have two big wings, and the back wings are these weird little club-like sticks or antennae-like projections. And some people say that they are for some type of balance. You can look more of this up from a reputable source. But what I'm going to do right now is I'm just going to write Diptera right here. All right, and we're going to move on. There we go. Thanks, Yvea. It sounds like some kind of like medieval undergarment, but it's actually the back pair of wings on Diptera. Okay, so we're gonna nature journal these right here. And so now that we did, I notice, I wonder, it reminds me of, we can, start assuming things, and we know the importance of asking questions and not making assumptions, but sometimes it's good to just go ahead and jump ahead. So what we're gonna do here is we're actually just gonna do sort of like a nature journal entry. So feel free to kind of use some color here if you want. This is, I believe, an endemic species to Galapagos. It's a Zylocopa genus, and I can't remember if it's Darwini. I think it's Darwini. Zylocopa genus. Zylocopa is a huge genus. I think it might also be um, the next, like a tribe as well of bees. So I'm going to write Zylocopa. And so one thing for how to nature journal bugs is, just like nature journaling in general, having some titles can be useful. Doing this part right away is not always the best, but we've already talked about how to, not make assumptions, and how to do more than just a species profile. But right now, I am going to write the genus, and it should be in italics. So italics, bubble letters is always a challenge for me, especially the X's. And we're going to talk about why knowing a little bit of entomology does help with all of this. Just like when we talked about nature journaling plants a couple weeks ago, I said that knowing some botany. Oh no, I totally messed up. That's what happens when I talk at the same time. This is actually a good example to show that it's okay, like, to kind of mess up your writing sometimes in nature journaling. There you go. Haha. So what I will mention is, what I recommend is just trying to learn some of the orders. So knowing some about entomology is helpful. And I would say that knowing the orders, like if we're getting into just insects now at this point, knowing a few orders is really important. So in this case, Xylocopa is in the Hymenoptera. Bees and wasps are all in the Hymenoptera. Ants are in the Hymenoptera. So knowing a few of those orders is useful. Let me make my page a little bit bigger. So you can see here I messed up the genus name, but knowing a few of these orders is useful. And then even backing up a few steps, I use the term bugs very loosely. Someone in my YouTube shorts got kind of mad at me that I used the word bug to talk about an arachnid. But even before orders, we've got lots of different types of, you can use this word invertebrate if you want. Anything that has no backbone is an invertebrate. Anything that has an exoskeleton is an arthropod. Arthropod. So arthropods under invertebrate. And then under arthropod, we've got insects. And we also have things such as arachnids. So if you're not sure what something is, you can just call it an invertebrate. If you know that it has an exoskeleton, this includes even crabs, you can call it an arthropod. If you know that it has 3 body segments and 4 wings, then you can call it an insect. And if you know it has 8 legs and basically 2 body segments, it's an arachnid. But if you just want, you can just call everything an invertebrate. Yep, great, Ivea. So I'm going to go back and add this medieval undergarment name to these weird organs there. Okay, so knowing a little bit of entomology helps. The next thing that is really great is using iNaturalist. My phone is my camera right now, so I can't show you it on my phone. But I've talked about iNaturalist before. It's a great way to start learning some entomology. And when you're out nature journaling, you can take photos of stuff, post them on there, try to identify what species it is, or maybe just what genus or even family. And little by little, you can learn some of the orders and stuff. Oh, and I use the word family, but a lot of times with insects, it's the order that is most important to learn, and it's kind of the useful category, whereas like in plant, family is usually the useful category. Yes, and if you can't remember it, it's the way that it all works is kinky people can often find great sex. I think there's another one, more kindergarten version, but I can never remember the other one. So, okay, let's see. I think we might have one more bug to look at here. You can always take a screenshot if you want to draw these more in depth, or go back and watch this video again. It's going to be up as a recorded version. For those of you that didn't see, um, most of the photos in here, not this one, it's not that close up, but most of the photos were taken with this really cool close focus lens, that I'll post again, um, in case you want to check it out. It's a super useful tool for nature journaling bugs. I highly recommend it. I use it for my botany photos as well a lot. Most of my iNaturalist photos are taken with this lens. It's only like $35. If you buy it using this Amazon link that I'm posting right now, I get like a small portion. I think I make maybe $20 a month off of those Amazon affiliate links, which is more than I make off of YouTube. So it helps. If you don't want to support Amazon.com, that's totally understandable. And I think you can get it other places, but if you follow the link, you can at least get the information about it and then find it somewhere else. Okay, let's see. I think I got one more. Oh no, this is the last slide. So let's go ahead and do a couple more things to it. The one other thing that I wanted to point out here with knowing a little bit about the entomology is knowing what you can fudge and what you can't fudge. And I talked about this in the botany one too. So for example, with certain flowers, it's okay if you add a few petals. With other flowers, that getting the number of petals right is like very important. And if you're drawing it or nature journaling it and you get the number of petals wrong, that's not okay. So similarly with bugs, there's certain things you don't want to fudge. The number of legs is something you don't want to fudge unless it's like there's certain orders of arthropods where it's less important, like the Diplopoda. Like if you're drawing a centipede or a millipede, it probably doesn't matter. And even like the isopods, some of them have variation in the number of legs, but I think it's like 8 to 10. But if you're drawing an arachnid or an insect, then you need to get the number of legs right. Obviously, if you're seeing it in the field, it's possible that like it could be missing a leg or something, but those are some of the things that you need to get right. And the number of body segments are things you don't want to fudge. Yeah, so that's most of what I have for tonight. I'm going to try to, this was sort of an experiment to see if I had the bandwidth here in Galapagos to actually do a live. It seems like it worked pretty well. So thanks for everybody who joined in. Thanks to all my Patreon supporters. Lots of you here. Lots of you here are Patreon supporters. Really appreciate it. I'll just put that up here so all of you know that for as little as $5 a month, less than a cup of coffee in California, you can support the show. It's my main source of income, and they also get access to, like right now I'm doing mini podcasts where I record different things that I'm observing while I'm walking down the street in Galapagos, and provide those for Patreons in addition to a bunch of other stuff. So thanks to all of you who support the show that way. It's a huge support, and that would work often is the way that I learned it. And for me, the ancient Romans and Greeks did discover that mnemonics work better when you oh, Up and Adam has a different perspective on it. I beg to differ, but the ancient Greeks and Romans learned that mnemonics work better if you have rated R content in associated with the memory. So for me, I find that to be the case, and hopefully this video won't get demonetized for that. I always get demonetized for scientific type things like that, like my last video that I had clam penises in. That video got taken off of Instagram. So anyways, everybody, thanks for joining in. Keep up the good work. Nature journaling bugs, and I filmed a new video today that will be coming up hopefully next week, or maybe I'll have something up on Sunday. All right, keep up the good work, everybody. Bye.